What more can you tell us about this breaking news?
Well, we're learning, Don, that high-level advisors close to then presidential nominee Donald Trump were in frequent communication during the campaign with Russians known to U.S. intelligence. This is according to multiple current and former intelligence, law enforcement, and administration officials that have been talking to myself as well as my colleague Jim Sciutto. And both the frequency of these communications and the proximity to Mr. Trump during the campaign of those involved raised a red flag with U.S. intelligence and law enforcement, according to these officials, and the communications were intercepted during routine intelligence collection targeting Russian officials and other Russian nationals known to U.S. intelligence. And among them were several senior Trump advisors that apparently, according to our sources, were regularly communicating with Russian nationals. And so that was really what caught the attention of U.S. law enforcement and U.S. intelligence officials. And officials we've been speaking with emphasized that these communications between campaign staff and representatives of foreign governments are not unusual. However, these particular communications stood out to investigators due to the frequency, the volume, and the level of the Trump advisors involved. And as we have been told by our sources, investigators have not reached a judgment on the intent of those conversations. Adding to U.S. investigators' concerns, though, were intercepted communications between Russian officials before and after the election discussing their belief that they had special access to Mr. Trump, according to law enforcement and intelligence officials we've been speaking with. So, Don, all of this was coming at a time when U.S. intelligence officials believed that Russia was trying to sway the election in favor of Donald Trump and to hurt Hillary Clinton. So within that context, that also added to the concern in the intelligence community.
Well, the question is, let's dig a little bit more deeper on this, Pamela. And be specific. Did President Trump know about these contacts? Was he briefed?
My colleague Evan Perez and I were told through our sources that both President Obama and then President-elect Trump were briefed on the details of the extensive communications between suspected Russian operatives and people associated with the Trump campaign and the Trump business. This is according to U.S. officials familiar with this matter. And the extensive contacts drew concerns of U.S. intelligence and law enforcement officials, in part because, as I pointed out, it came at a time of Russian cyber activities targeting mostly Democratic Party political organizations post-election. Intelligence briefings on Russia meddling in the U.S. elections included details of those communications, which included people involved in Mr. Trump's businesses. And these communications were gathered as part of routine U.S. intelligence collection and not because people close to Trump were being targeted. Now, the FBI and U.S. intelligence agencies continue to try to determine what the motive for these communications were. One concern, Don, was whether Trump associates were coordinating with Russian intelligence operatives. And the release of the damaging information about Hillary Clinton campaign, as you'll recall, those emails from the DNC. And so that is really of concern. And that is what intelligence officials and law enforcement officials have been focused on. As one official said, if that were the case, then that would escalate things. And so far, though, the findings have been inconclusive. And as we know, Don, just recently in late December, Michael Flynn, the now former national security advisor to Donald Trump, was speaking to the Russian ambassador, talking about sanctions. We know DOJ alerted to the White House on January 26th that Flynn was not being forthcoming about the conversation and the fact that sanctions was mentioned. And now, as we know, President Trump has asked for his resignation. So this is another huge development and gives us a better idea of the investigation that is ongoing of Trump's associates during the campaign and Russians who have been on the U.S. radar. Don?
So that's what it meant for the election. They were trying to figure out whether or not they were coordinating. And so far, there's no evidence so far of this. So is this investigation ongoing, Pamela?
It is ongoing. Absolutely. There is a broader probe within the counterintelligence division of the FBI trying to figure out Russian activities in the United States and what these communications mean. What was the motive? Was there any sort of collusion going on? As I pointed out earlier, it's inconclusive. But of course, investigators are looking at the bigger picture and the context of this happening during a time when the Russians were boasting to one another in intercepted communications about having access to Trump. Trump. And so all of this is sort of taken into account, and the FBI is looking at this. And as we've learned through our sources who have been talking to both Jim Sciutto, my colleague Jim Sciutto, as well as Evan Perez, this has been brought to the attention of the FBI, and they continue to look at this. And it has also been brought to the attention of Donald Trump during the briefing before he even took office, before he became officially president of the United States.